Hello, welcome to Wilson's Barbecue. In this video we're going to be making some beef tallow, rendered beef fat, beef dripping, whatever it is that you call it in your country. We're going to be doing it with some leftover brisket trimmings. We're going to be using a grinder and I'll explain why in a bit. You can go out and buy beef tallow, or if you trim a lot of briskets you can definitely make it yourself. So rendered beef fat or beef tallow has got a load of applications. You can use it to season your smoker, grease the hinges. You can fry in it, so you can make fried chicken because it's got a real high smoke point. You can do loads of stuff with it. Anywhere that you would use normal oil, you can use beef tallow. So as I say, I'm going to be using this leftover brisket trimmings. I typically have a lot of trimmings on hand from briskets. About 70% of those I use to make sausage, and then what I don't use, I use to make tallow. So before we get to actually rendering it, we want to break this down into small pieces. The smaller the better, more surface area, the more fat we can actually render out from this. You can just use a knife, cube it up as small as possible on a chopping board. If you have a grinder, then I would definitely recommend you use it. That's what I'm going to use today. It just means that we can get this down into a real small fine grind before we start rendering it out on the stove. And for me, I think this is the most efficient way and it maximizes your return. You can see that there's a little bit of meat still left on. That's really not a problem at all. It's just going to crisp up and it'll separate from the oil anyway. So if you don't have a grinder, what I would suggest is that you cut this down as small as possible, like this, but we do. So what I'm going to do is just make sure that the pieces are small enough to go into the top of the grinder. Any long bits like that, I can just kind of leave it as it is and just cut off any big chunks of meat. So these are going to go into the freezer for a little bit just to firm up. It will make it easier to grind. So while the meat is chilling out in the freezer, just getting firm, just quickly about the grinder. You can also put these things into the freezer as well to keep them cold. It will help with the grind, particularly if you've got a cheap grinder that maybe isn't as powerful. Having these cold is going to help a lot. This grinder is pretty powerful. I don't seem to ever have any problems with grinding meat, providing the meat is cold itself, so I'm not going to put these into the freezer. In terms of actually rendering the fat, I'm going to be doing this on the stove top. You don't have to. You can put it into a foil tray, put it into the barbecue, put it into the oven, cover it with foil, make sure that you have it covered, and just slowly cook it that way for a couple of hours. This version is just for the home kitchen, so I'm going to be using a pan. I've picked the widest bottom pan that I've got. It's not as deep as I'd like it, but what I'm looking for is a wide base because that will help us render the fat more quickly rather than a tall slim one where you've got the fat on top that's not getting as much heat. So nice wide bottom pan and you'll be good. So now that we've ground out all of our fat nice and fine, we now need to get onto the rendering. So when it comes to rendering and actually creating the tallow, there are two objectives. The first thing is to use heat to liquefy the hard fat, and that's where you get your beef tallow. And the second thing is to remove the water content from the fat. And what you'll be left with is a nice golden liquid that can be used for all those things I mentioned earlier. We are going to start off with about a medium heat, and we don't want to go too high on this because we don't want the bottom to scorch, we don't want the fat to burn. If you burn this fat, it's not going to taste very pleasant at all. Stick it on a medium heat and we're going to adjust it as time goes on. We can scrape the bottom if we feel like it's starting to catch, then just back off the heat, and eventually over the course of the next 20 minutes just dial it into where you think that you're rendering the fat, but you're not going to catch it. What you can also do is just add a little bit of cold water just to make sure that nothing catches at the beginning, and that will eventually evaporate just like the water that's naturally found in the fat. Keep a close eye on it, make sure it doesn't catch, and we'll come back in a bit. So we're about 10 minutes in and you can see all of the water that's come out of that fat. The goal is to boil all of that water away and just leave us with the pure rendered fat at the end. So this isn't catching, so I'm going to turn the heat up just a little bit. I don't want it to go too fast because, as I say, I don't want to scorch it, but it needs to be hot enough to actually render the fat and boil the water. But the lower and slower you can do that, the better. So while we're cooking some beef tallow and talking about it, I thought it was worth touching on the topic of using beef tallow to improve your brisket cook. So I've definitely got some opinions on that, but someone who's covered that topic in way better detail than I ever could is Joe Yim from Knock South Barbecue. I'll drop that video link below, go check it out. It gives some really good insights into when and how to use beef tallow to improve your brisket cooks. So about 20 minutes in, you can see the amount of water that's coming off this. I'm going to step up the temperature just a little bit, just to make sure that we're rendering that fat out. But it looks like we're at a point now where we're gonna start to see some evaporation and start to see rendering happening. So it has been about an hour and 15 minutes. You can see that a lot of the water has disappeared. You can tell that there's still water in there because you can see the little bubbles, just like when you fry chicken. So we're gonna wait until all of these little pieces here turn really crispy, and when they do, we'll pretty much know that this is done. But we're not sticking to the bottom. This is ticking along nice and slowly, so we know we're not going to burn it. And what we're looking for at the end is a nice golden colour. It's quite clear at the moment, but by the end it should be nice and golden. So we're about an hour and a half in. This is the point where we need to start paying pretty close attention to this. Most of the water's gone, and you can see that it's getting a lot darker. You can see all of the pieces of fat are starting to turn quite dark and brown. Some of them are firm, but most of them are still soft, so they've still got a fair bit of fat to render out of there. But because we've lost so much water, which was the goal, these are just going to keep on frying now. So as I say, just need to pay real close attention, make sure nothing sticks on the bottom, make sure nothing burns, as you're going to get a real horrible taste in the tallow. Right, so we're pretty much an hour and 45 minutes on the dot. This is as dark as I'm going to take it. It's nicely rendered out. I'm pretty happy with as much as we got, so let's filter it out. So the first filter is just going to be through a metal strainer. So that's pretty much it. We've got our rendered beef fat there, pretty much ready to go. You don't need to do anything more with this. You can see that it's kind of cloudy. What I like to do is just do an additional step, which is run it through a coffee filter. This is going to take a couple of coffee filters to get it all the way through, as it kind of tends to stall, and you want to keep this warm whilst you're doing it as well, otherwise it will get too thick and it won't go through. So I like to do the extra step of just pouring that through, but it's definitely not essential. It's quite a slow process as well, but I like to do that just to give it a little bit more clarity, make sure that there are no little bits of sediment, and I think it probably helps with the longevity of it and prevents it from going rancid so soon. So I'll get that done, and it will be ready to use, ready to put in the fridge, ready to put in the freezer, and it will last for a long time in the freezer and a good couple of weeks if it's in the fridge. So just while that is filtering through, these little crispy pieces of fat, definitely don't throw these away. These are really good. You can put them into chili, you can put them into, if you're doing barbecue beans, you can use them anywhere really. What I like to do is salt them, so I've just put some salt over them, mix them up. I'll put them into a freezer bag and just freeze them, and then use them for, as I say, things like beans or chili. So there we go, that's how I make beef tallow. We've got one of these and then probably about that much more just dripping through. Use it for anything you like, as I say, seasoning smokers, rejuvenating brisket, greasing hinges, frying chicken, anything. It's really, really versatile, and I definitely recommend that you have some on hand if you're into cooking barbecue. If you use it for anything else that I haven't mentioned, drop it in the comment below. I'd love to know what you use it for. Please don't forget to subscribe to the channel. It really helps me out. Drop me a like, drop me a comment below, and I'll see you again in a couple of weeks for another video.